A high school boy's daredevil adventure leads him to a cranky old lady who steals his belongings. This is a must-watch explosive new anime for October. The female lead, Momo, is deceived by a scoundrel who swindles her money and body. He demands money or a good time, but Momo responds with a swift sidekick. However, the scoundrel blocks it and kicks her back. Unable to win the fight, he curses and leaves. Despite this, Momo is still heartbroken over the breakup because the scoundrel looks like her idol Ken. Distraught, Momo wanders like a zombie to the protagonist's classroom door. The timid, lonely boy with glasses is bullied, but doesn't fight back. Unable to watch this, Momo sits in front of him to support him. This stops the bullies from throwing paper balls. Momo finds it boring and looks for a place to release stress. Unexpectedly, the boy with glasses follows her and starts a conversation, believing she must like him because of the supernatural magazine in his hands. Convinced of aliens' existence, he annoys Momo, who finds him too chatty. In a few words, she blasts his annoying otaku behavior, telling him that's why he has no friends. This leaves him devastated, making Momo feel guilty, and she goes back to console him. Although she doesn't believe in aliens, she believes in ghosts. The boy laughs at her belief, but Momo tells him her grandmother is a medium who can exorcise spirits. He insists this doesn't prove ghosts exist. Momo challenges him, asking if aliens have ever invited him aboard a UFO. They argue and decide to bet. Momo will visit a rumored UFO hotspot while the boy explores a haunted tunnel. They aim to prove each other's beliefs. The loser must run errands for the winner. That night, Momo goes alone to an abandoned hospital where calling for a UFO on the rooftop supposedly leads to abduction and memory wipe. Meanwhile, the boy visits a creepy tunnel, a famous haunted site according to the internet. As they keep in touch by phone, the boy claims he's not scared, but soon starts screaming upon entering the tunnel. Momo, on her end, hears the boy questioning her belief in ghosts despite never seeing one. Momo shares her story. She was raised by her exorcist grandmother, who required her to perform rituals even on the way to school, leading to mockery from her peers, including the boys she liked. Angry at the rituals, she blamed her grandmother and stopped speaking to her and performing the rituals. However, she later realized her distress was not due to the boy's mockery, but because he ridiculed her grandmother. She loves her grandmother and her unique job as a medium. More than believing in ghosts, she believes because of her grandmother. She then asked Glasses Boy why he believed in the existence of aliens. As they talked and walked, Glasses Boy felt that liking something didn't need a reason. Just then, he spotted blood footprints on the ground that spread up to his feet. Filled with fear, he turned around, and a terrifying face appeared in front of him. The ghostly old lady gave him two choices. Either suck on my persimmon or I'll lick your beef. Terrified, Glasses Boy ran away, but he encountered the high-speed grandma. If caught, he would be cursed. Unfortunately, by the time Momo said this, Glasses Boy had already been caught, and the signal was lost. Worried, Momo rushed to save him, but the next second, three strange humanoid creatures appeared behind her. Ha ha ha! The aliens have come! The three aliens grabbed Momo and violently tore her clothes. When she woke up again, she was tied to a chair. The aliens said they were friendly, but their species only had males, so they could only reproduce through cloning. This method, however, did not allow for biological evolution. To retrieve reproductive skills like humans, the aliens wanted human reproductive organs. They planned to mate first, then take Momo's uterus and genitals for research. Hearing this, Momo was devastated. She hadn't even given her virginity to a scoundrel, let alone be violated by aliens. However, being tied up, she couldn't escape. The aliens could control her brainwaves with psychic powers, igniting her desires. Surprisingly, Momo resisted, but the aliens forcibly spread her legs, and a mechanical bull's part pressed against her. Just then, Momo's phone rang. As an alien picked it up, a red light flashed, and high-speed grandma burst out of the phone. She hit the alien's bull's part, sending him flying. Half of high-speed grandma's body was still Glasses Boy. The two hadn't fully merged, and Glasses Boy was still conscious. The aliens were extremely interested in this phenomenon, a technology they didn't possess. As the primary consciousness turned into high-speed grandma, she came to suck the alien's bull's part. The alien hurriedly tore open his clothes to reveal his true form. telling Glasses Boy to leave unless he handed over his bull's part. High-speed Grandma didn't say much and started running, quickly reaching him and performing a German suplex, biting off the alien's bull's part. Another alien was slammed into the wall. Now only one remained, who quickly declared a ceasefire. After all, they had a friendly treaty with humans and only wanted reproductive organs. At this moment, the consciousness switched back to Glasses Boy. Admiring the aliens, he eagerly said, "Take it. Whatever you want, I'll give." He also spoke his true feelings. He had always been friendless, which is why he wanted to find aliens to befriend. He had been calling for UFOs from the rooftop since elementary school, but aliens never came. Glasses Boy was bullied and not recognized by others. However, Momo protected him, so he too wanted to protect Momo. For Momo, he would gladly become a monster. After shouting that, Glasses Boy was completely assimilated by high-speed Grandma. Momo couldn't help but cheer for him. But in the next second, an alien blasted the emboldened Glasses Boy. The aliens then labeled them as hostile humans, deciding not to abide by the friendly treaty anymore. Intent on finishing what they had started, Momo fought back hard. Suddenly, she remembered her grandmother's words about the daily rituals that could release energy and block misfortune and illness. Following her grandmother's advice, Momo concentrated her power in her lower abdomen, imagining releasing energy from the top of her head. Unexpectedly, the glass cover and chair binding her shattered from the energy. The alien's psychic power was pushed back too. It turned out that the excessive stimulation of Momo's brainwaves had activated her chakras. Now, with newfound superpowers, Momo unleashed the side-spinning kick she had used on a scoundrel before, a kick even the aliens couldn't withstand. The UFO, disguised as the moon, was utterly destroyed. However, Glasses Boy was still under high-speed Grandma's control and attacked Momo again. Momo forcefully expelled the spirit from his body. Although the possession was over, the curse was not lifted because high-speed Grandma still held on to Glasses Boy's part. As long as it wasn't recovered, Glasses Boy's curse couldn't be lifted. After saying this, high-speed Grandma returned to the tunnel, and the uncontrolled UFO crashed into the abandoned hospital and crash-landed. Glasses Boy finally came to his senses. Now one finally believed in aliens, and the other in ghosts. Glasses Boy could only maintain his sanity because Momo was using her superpowers to suppress the curse. It seemed they had no choice but to defeat high-speed Grandma. As Glasses Boy started undressing to go immediately, he let Momo wear his clothes to go home, blaming himself for everything and not wanting to involve Momo anymore. But how could Momo stay out of it, especially when she needed to help suppress the curse? She picked up the clothes and gave them back to Glasses Boy, but he insisted on her wearing them. Otherwise, he couldn't even speak to Momo. At that moment, Momo's heart raced because Glasses Boy had just inadvertently quoted her idol Ken. To calm down, she changed the subject and asked what Glasses Boy's real name was. Without thinking, he blurted out, "I'm Ken," stunning Momo completely. A male classmate, who doesn't even have genitals and shares the same name as her idol, shocked Momo on the spot. She inadvertently forgot to use her powers, and Ken transformed into an old lady. Frightened, she quickly threw him out and then made a rule: to stay normal, don't mention his name. She nicknamed him Transcendent Kid. As they walked into town, dawn broke, and pedestrians began to appear. Ken couldn't go home looking like this, so Momo took him to her house, warning him to be cautious because her grandmother is very strict with men. She almost killed her ex-boyfriend once. Before the grandmother could see him, Ken nearly burned to death. Momo hurriedly moved him into the river, remembering that their house is surrounded by a barrier to ward off evil spirits. Ken, cursed as the old lady, couldn't enter. Momo temporarily removed the talisman from the wall, allowing Ken safely through, and he even changed his hairstyle. Momo's house turned out to be a mansion, but luckily her grandmother wasn't home. She went to change clothes in her room. As soon as Ken closed the door, he turned back into the old lady. Momo had to change clothes with the door open, maintaining her powers with one hand. She then found clothes for Ken and asked if he really lost his genitals, as the old lady claimed she took them. Ken checked, and, to his shock, they were gone. Curious, Momo tried to see what it looked like, but Ken refused, causing her to think he was being petty, while Ken was truly devastated. Blaming Momo for taking him to explore haunted places, they began to argue. Momo thought the root of all evil was Ken approaching her, but Ken, feeling low, explained he didn't want to miss the chance to make a friend after sensing her kindness. However, they were from different worlds and ended up in this mess. They would likely part ways after this. Momo was upset by Ken's assumptions and self-conclusions, noting his tendency to push people away. No wonder he had no friends. Softening her stance, Momo suggested they could normally discuss supernatural topics in the future. Suddenly, Ken called her a freak and started blaming her for being inconsiderate. They began to fight until they heard knocking, but it wasn't the sound of Momo's doorbell. Remembering her grandmother mentioning 2 doorbells, one for humans and one for evil spirits, Momo realized evil spirits had come after she removed the talisman. Unable to fight it off, their only option was to reapply the talisman, which would cause the evil spirit to combust. Momo sneaked out the back door and saw no trace of the spirit, but suddenly a wall appeared in front of them, trapping them inside, and both started bleeding, seemingly affected by a distant black mist. Just then, a large face appeared in front of Momo and said, "I've found you." It accused them of breaking their promise and called them bad humans. The giant evil spirit clapped its hands, creating a hurricane that blew away the charm Momo was holding. It then punched Ken into the wall, but fortunately the charm was sturdy enough not to break. Momo and Ken exchanged glances and decided to run. But with a casual wave of its arm, the spirit sent them flying. It stomped the ground heavily and demanded their genitals. Without time to think, they ran first to create distance. Later, Momo asked Ken if he still had a genital. Ken denied it and said it was an alien, identifiable by a ring on its head, known as the Flatwoods Monster, a 3-meter-tall alien. Why does the doorbell set for ghosts also react to aliens? Ken recalled a study suggesting that people who frequently encounter paranormal events also often see UFOs. There might be a connection between ghosts and aliens. As they spoke, the alien began to emit a black mist. If they weren't beaten to death, they would be poisoned. Furthermore, Momo had to suppress Ken's curse and couldn't fully use her powers. Part of Ken's body was rapidly aging. Momo applied her powers, but one hand remained unchanged. Facing the ruins ahead, Ken decided to gamble. He asked Momo to suppress the brain curse while freeing the rest of his body. Just then, the alien's giant face appeared again. Fortunately, they were adept at escaping, although Momo was not yet skilled at controlling this power. She closed her eyes and split Ken's curse into 2, only freeing his body. Ken's eyes turned bright red, and in the next second, he reverted to his rapidly aging form. However, just as the alien attacked again, Ken transformed successfully, dodging the attack while holding Momo and retaining his rationality. He suddenly looked very handsome, even speaking just like Momo's idol. But this Ken seemed to lack survival instinct, walking directly under the alien's foot and getting slapped away. However, the alien was confused and raised its hand, which had fingers cut off at an unbelievable speed, showcasing the power of rapid aging. Momo's hope was reignited. But Ken's handsomeness didn't last long as his body began to fail under the strain, and the alien flung him away. His body and consciousness reverted to normal, explaining that his body could not withstand the power of the curse. Cutting off 5 fingers was already the limit. How can we defeat that guy? At that moment, both fell silent as they noticed the alien's movements resembled sumo wrestling. According to sumo rules, touching the ground with your hands means a loss. So, Ken mustered strength for another transformation and directly attacked the alien's leg, chopping it off. Momo concentrated intensely to suppress the curse, and the alien finally fell, melting as soon as its hand hit the ground. The alien did a front flip, grabbed Momo with one hand, and slammed her into the wall with a powerful punch. Without the suppression of superpowers, Ken's body was about to completely turn into an elderly woman at high speed. Unexpectedly, he quickly recovered. Despite Momo being in such a state, she was unharmed and furiously accused the alien of cheating. She swore never to forgive the deceitful creature. The alien, taken aback by her scolding, struck Momo again with a barrage of punches that hit her body like a storm, deeply denting the wall. Momo was satisfied with the depth of the hole, presuming it was just outside the Torii gate. After saying this, she immediately used her powers to pull Ken into her arms and attached a charm to the gate's pillar. Sure enough, the alien's body began to disintegrate naturally, and the illusion vanished. Momo held Ken tightly, not daring to look, until everything returned to normal. they narrowly escaped death. Just as they relaxed, Ken turned into an elderly woman at high speed again. Momo hurriedly infused him with superpowers. This time, Ken was forced to change his hairstyle, and Momo made a teasing remark before she ran out of energy and fainted. Without the suppression of superpowers, Ken completely turned into an elderly woman at high speed. The grandma who nearly bullied Ken and Momo to death was surprisingly thrashed by Momo's grandmother. After Momo fainted, no one could help Ken suppress the curse, and the grandma took control of his body. Just as she was about to attack Momo, a big sister with a broom on her head appeared, who was Momo's grandmother. The grandma instantly teleported behind her to sneak attack, but ended up burning herself instead. It turned out that Momo's grandmother had anticipated this and had set a trap in advance. Now the grandma was trapped in a circle she couldn't escape from, which was a barrier constructed by Momo's grandmother. By nailing the talismans inside the circle, a barrier is formed inside. Nailing them outside forms a barrier outside. This was why the grandma couldn't attack Momo's grandmother. Frustrated and powerless, the grandma could only make threats, vowing to devour her. However, she was harshly reprimanded by Momo's grandmother like hitting a baseball. Trapped in the circle, the grandma cursed loudly and threatened that if she was killed, the body's owner would also die. Momo's grandmother didn't care, thinking Ken was a scoundrel deceiving her granddaughter and deserved to die. With a final farewell, the grandma screamed sharply, and Momo woke from the nightmare, finding herself in her room. She hurried downstairs, saw her grandmother, and asked if Ken had already gone back. Her grandmother dodged the question, asking if Momo had been to a haunted place. Momo said it was her friend, then asked about Ken again. Her grandmother then revealed she had killed the evil spirit and was still holding a grudge over that past event, mocking Momo for not believing in spirits. At this point, Momo could only kneel and apologize, simply wanting to know Ken's whereabouts. Her grandmother told her to check the temple, and Momo, warning that she wouldn't forgive any harm to Ken, ran off while feeling guilty. Momo had pressured Ken to visit the haunted site, now risking his life. However, when she opened the door, she found Ken eating comfortably inside. Seeing Momo safe, he was relieved. Then, her grandmother appeared, explaining that as long as Ken stayed inside, the curse wouldn't activate. Momo briefly shared their experiences and her newly awakened powers, which her grandmother didn't believe. Instead, she spoke about the grandma, a modern monster that once wreaked havoc nationwide. She had visited that tunnel before and found the spiritual energy too strong, even for her, resembling a bound spirit. The worst had happened. The grandma merged with a bound spirit. Momo's grandmother advised giving up as they were no match for the grandma. But Momo, thinking of her idol who would surely help Ken, decided she must also help Ken. At this point, Grandma could only give her one piece of advice: to play a game of tag with the freeway grandma and lure her outside where her powers would weaken. Even Momo should be able to defeat her. But lacking confidence in herself, Momo asked her grandmother to think of a solution using her unbeatable barrier technique. However, her grandmother's barriers only worked by borrowing the divine power of the land and wouldn't function outside the city. Thus, tag was the only solution, but the one who would have to run wouldn't be Momo, it would be Ken. That made things even more difficult. To suppress the curse, Ken had to carry Momo while running, a real challenge for any nerd. Grandma then taught him the Saitama method of training, telling him to start working hard from now on, young man. Meanwhile, Momo also needed to level up her supernatural powers. Once they both got stronger, Grandma would train them herself. After saying this, the old lady left. Ken and Momo thanked and apologized to each other. Momo went to get Ken a quilt, as he could only sleep there that night. But Ken suddenly stopped her, awkwardly saying he was thirsty. Grandma went back to watching TV in the living room. The news reported that a popular idol actually had an illegitimate child and had lied about their age. Passing by, Momo scoffed at the meaningless news. The next day, Ken and Momo began their training. Now there was a big problem. Ken needed to use the bathroom, but Momo's powers couldn't penetrate walls. If he went, his curse might escape. She had to ask her grandmother for help. Grandma first asked how the curse worked. Momo replied that she could see Ken's aura and could shrink it by holding onto it tightly. This worked on other beings and objects too, moving them by grabbing their aura. Initially, when her powers awakened, They were even stronger. Momo felt like she could turn any imagined scene into reality, making her invincible. But this power quickly weakened. Grandma identified the issue. Momo relied too much on sight and should use her other senses, like touch. Following Grandma's advice, Momo closed her eyes to feel and actually managed to see and touch the aura. But she was still inexperienced, and Ken almost completely controlled his body, nearly bursting to use the bathroom. Despite Momo's objections, he rushed for the toilet, starting a desperate chase that even Grandma suddenly joined. Eventually, Ken safely made it into the bathroom, with Momo holding the door open to suppress the curse. Grandma told Momo that the power she initially felt upon awakening was her true strength, just sealed for unknown reasons. She needed to gradually unlock it through training. As they were discussing this, Ken in the bathroom suddenly transformed into the Freeway Grandma. Grandma seemed paralyzed as it turned out the Freeway Grandma's curse was contagious, spreading through Ken. She could use the curse to kill anyone Ken saw. The Freeway Grandma threatened Momo using Grandma, demanding Momo come to the tunnel that night, or she'd use Ken to kill everyone nearby. After saying this, the Freeway Grandma disappeared, and Ken and Grandma regained their ability to move. But half of the charms were tainted by darkness. Momo told her grandmother about what had just happened, learning they would head to the tunnel tonight. Her grandmother equipped them fully and gave her granddaughter a hug before they left. Despite facing a life or death situation tonight, they still felt awkward because the tunnel was too far away, requiring them to take a tram. Passengers around them were too scared to look, but Momo didn't care anymore, filled with hatred for the Freeway Grandma who dared to harm her dear grandmother. On the tram, Momo changed her clothes because the ones her grandmother prepared were too outdated. She believed a combat outfit should look fabulous. After arriving, Momo tried to use her charms to have Ken lead the way, but he didn't fall for it, and they ended up walking together, feeling more optimistic as they talked. They joked about defeating the Freeway Grandma as easily as they had an alien before. However, when they shone their flashlight, a massive head filled the tunnel, scaring them into running. As they turned around, another head was behind them, both heads moving closer. Momo pulled out a bunch of baseball bats from Ken's backpack and shot them at the head, but it swallowed them with its eyes. With no other choice, they had to unleash Ken's curse. Once transformed, Ken became zombie-like. Momo cheered for him from behind, but he soon reverted back to normal because Momo could no longer see the energy inside him. It turned out the Freeway Grandma had returned the beads to Ken, lifting his curse. Without the power of the curse, they faced two gaping mouths with Momo's powers unable to cope. Remembering her grandmother's words, she provoked the Freeway Grandma into a race. Surprisingly, reverse psychology worked, and they started a game of tag. The rule was that the Freeway Grandma had to count to 10 minutes before starting to chase them. But she cheated, jumping from 1 minute to 10 and caught Momo with numerous arms. Now it was Ken's turn to be counted for 10 minutes. Furious and helpless, Ken didn't want to always be saved by Momo, so he charged at the Freeway Grandma, biting fiercely and not letting go despite her attempts to shake him off. Realizing the clothes he wore were problematic, the Freeway Grandma re-entered Ken, bursting through the clothes intending to return and consume Momo. Unbeknownst to her, she had fallen into their trap. Now within Ken, Momo could see the energy again. She grabbed it with both hands, also seizing the Freeway Grandma's lifeline. Before the Freeway Grandma could attack in desperation, Momo crushed her. Although not completely destroyed, only a small amount of her power remained sealed within Ken. As the situation reversed, Momo was about to deal with the old lady when suddenly a massive crab appeared in the tunnel, demanding they return the grandma. The Freeway Grandma and the ground spirit had not merged after all. The giant crab was the ground spirit in the tunnel. Ken and Momo, too scared to torment the Freeway Grandma, started running as the giant crab chased behind them. The reason why the spirit took the form of a crab is said to be because the deceased transform into marsh crabs to cross the River of Three Crossings. As Momo explained this, they desperately fled. Unfortunately, the Freeway Grandma was leading the crab right to them. With no other choice, Ken transformed. In the instant the crab's claw came down, Ken, instantly transformed, picked up Momo and rushed out. Now, Momo rode on Ken, who was speeding forward, holding the reins, which were the Freeway Grandma. However, there was a problem. Ken, moving at high speed, couldn't turn properly. They both ended up crashing off a mountain road. At a critical moment, Ken spun his legs like propellers and somehow managed to hover in midair before slowing down and landing on the street. The giant crab followed right after, forcing them to keep running. To the onlookers on the street, it looked like Ken and Momo were merely engaged in a bizarre horseback battle. Running like this wasn't a solution. Ken felt he couldn't keep going much longer, yet they were still a distance from leaving the city. Ken, carrying Momo, rushed into a health center. The giant crab, however, was too destructive, and soon, both, along with the crab, ended up in a hot spring pool. Momo used her powers to burst a water pipe, and the hot water gushed out, submerging the giant crab, effectively cooking the mighty ground spirit. Ken and Momo continued to run towards the outskirts of the city, but then countless citizens chased after them. It turned out that a nearby cemetery had been awakened by the freeway grandma, who possessed the citizens on the street. Now they were caught between the giant crab ahead and ghostly citizens behind. Momo asked Ken to transform again, their last chance. After transforming, Ken carried Momo and dashed out at high speed, with Momo using her powers to help him navigate around obstacles. Facing the blocking crab, Ken jumped right onto it and kicked off, leaping into the air and changing direction dramatically. As his power ran out and the transformation ended, they saw a train from the air. Before they could rejoice, they plummeted down. Fortunately, Momo quickly deployed her psychic wings and Ken used his feet as brakes, allowing them to land just in time. Although Momo missed grabbing the freeway grandma in that instant, the grandma managed to escape Ken's body and then scolded the young duo for their trickery and lack of respect for an elder. Momo retorted, having never seen an elder who so poorly looked after the young. This time, the freeway grandma merged directly with the giant crab. Knowing they were close to leaving the city, the freeway grandma offered them some time to escape. Momo said a second was all she needed because her powers could grab anything. She then swung out a large hand and grabbed the train above because the freeway grandma's speed was only 100 kilometers per hour, while the train's speed was 120 kilometers per hour. They were sure to win the race. But unexpectedly, the freeway grandma lunged and grabbed the rear of the train. Little did they know, Momo had planned this as grandma was waiting ahead. Now, freeway grandma was held in place by Momo's psychic powers. As the streetcar left the city, her enormous form exploded in an instant. In that moment, Momo seemed to see the spirits of many young girls. Now, both freeway grandma and the ground spirit were completely eliminated, and the curse on Ken was fully lifted. Grandma had not intended to use such a violent method. Afterwards, the three of them went to the tunnel to pay their respects. Many girls had been abused and dismembered, their remains discarded here, turning into malevolent spirits. Mediums had been tracking freeway grandma for a long time, finding that wherever she appeared, there were always spirits of dead girls. Perhaps she was just comforting those who couldn't attain enlightenment. Unfortunately, they ultimately lashed out at the living, and thus they had to be sent on to the next life. Of course, the living must also never disrespect the dead. If one trespasses in their domain, death is an inevitable consequence. Fortunately, this time did not lead to any major disaster. Momo and Grandma still joyfully made a crab hot pot, but Ken had no appetite. Regardless, he was still very grateful to the grandmother and granddaughter for helping him retrieve his ox. When Grandma became curious about whether Ken's ox had truly returned, Ken was so frightened that he quickly ran away. It was also time for him to leave this strange family. As he was about to go, he suddenly felt a sense of loss. Would he and Momo become strangers again tomorrow? Unexpectedly, Momo called out to him, turning their goodbye into "see you tomorrow." Ken, who had finally found his missing genitals, was shocked to discover that only half was left. Early in the morning, Ken was sneaking around the school, practicing how to greet Momo later. Unexpectedly, Momo was standing at the school gate. Hope sprang in Ken's heart. Was she waiting for him? Trying not to get his hopes up, he thought she must be waiting for someone else and walked past her, ignoring her. Momo got annoyed and kicked him. That's when Ken realized that she was indeed waiting for him. As they walked to the classroom, they chatted about aliens and felt reluctant to part at the door. Just after saying goodbye to Momo, Ken was bumped into the classroom by a classmate and scorned by another girl. However, he wasn't discouraged because he had made a great friend in Momo. Meanwhile, Momo was daydreaming, and her trendy friends guessed she had missed school the previous day to win back an ex-boyfriend. Obviously, her attempt had failed. She must have smashed her phone in frustration, since she hadn't replied to their messages. Seeing Momo's gloomy face, they were even more convinced of their theory. In reality, Momo just wanted to continue discussing aliens with Ken. Ken, uninterested in studying, only wanted to chat about ghosts. Both were deeply preoccupied with each other, and school felt like dragging through the days until lunch break. The hallway was crowded, and both Ken and Momo, eager to find each other, missed each other perfectly. Momo asked Ken's classmates where he was, but they had no clue about him. They figured he might be in the student cafeteria during lunch break. Momo thought Ken wouldn't go to such a noisy place and searched for him in the store instead, while Ken went to the cafeteria. They missed each other again. Later, Ken visited the store and Momo the cafeteria, only to end up sitting despondently on benches, not far from each other. They missed each other because they always looked up just as the other looked down. As lunch break was ending, both felt the other was avoiding them. Ken, already feeling inferior, thought Momo didn't consider him a friend. Both stood up feeling gloomy and bumped into each other accidentally, even chipping their teeth. However, they didn't mind the minor accident and were busy asking each other where they had been. Ken quickly explained he had been looking for Momo all along. Only then did they realize they had both been searching for each other, making the atmosphere awkward. Just as they tried to find a new topic, two of Momo's trendy friends interrupted. They had just witnessed Ken and Momo kissing and naturally assumed they were dating. Momo, embarrassed by being caught, instinctively denied it, saying she couldn't possibly kiss someone like Ken, who retorted. The two, who had just been bubbly now, began arguing fiercely. The trendy friends watched the drama, covering their mouths, until the two left angrily. They then unanimously remarked how great Ken and Momo's relationship seemed. Ken first went to the bathroom. He had just impulsively responded in the heat of the moment and did not actually dislike Momo, so he thought it would be best to apologize later. However, he realized a big problem. Meanwhile, Momo returned to the classroom and was grilled by her friends. They even told others that Momo was dating a geek. Just as they were discussing this, Ken came looking for her. Momo, feeling embarrassed, did not want to talk to him. Ken kept insisting he had something important to tell her, but she maintained her attitude. Her friends began to feel that Momo was treating her boyfriend too harshly. This made Momo even less inclined to face Ken, despite his explanations and his pitiful tone, saying he really wanted to talk to her. The trendy girls got excited again, and Ken finally left dejectedly, leaving behind the words, "Is getting along with me that embarrassing?" Even the onlookers felt sorry for him, and Momo was filled with guilt. After school, Ken went home alone and accidentally bumped into a pink-haired beauty who was surprisingly friendly and even touched his arm to see if he was hurt. Ken was unaccustomed to such treatment, which made the pink-haired girl act even more gently. Momo then saw them chatting happily. "What's going on here?" Ken said he had no friends, she thought. The pink-haired girl walked past Momo with her friends, mocking how stupid the geek looked after being flirted with. It turns out she enjoyed seeing the dumbstruck look on a geek's face after flirting with him. Thinking no other cute girl would bother with Ken again, Momo used her powers to hit her on the head with a water basin. Ken was about to check on her when Momo took his arm and smiled, inviting him to walk home together. She purposely complimented Ken to annoy the pink-haired girl, saying, "No stupid woman could appreciate your charm." On their way home, Momo sincerely apologized to Ken, explaining that she felt embarrassed by her friend's mockery and did not think poorly of being seen with him. Ken was happy to reconcile with Momo. Then he remembered the big problem. They had defeated the speedy grandma, but only half of his genitals had returned. Only the stick was left, missing 2 balls. Momo laughed it off while Ken was the only one troubled by this. Grandma took a mirror to look at him and noticed something was amiss. She asked Momo to bring a doll and a basin. Ken placed his feet in the basin while Momo attached a charm to the doll. Grandma then began to fan Ken vigorously, asking Momo if she saw anything. Surprisingly, there was a moment when the energy inside Ken changed color. Grandma instructed her to pull out the energy at that moment. Momo's control over her powers grew even stronger, and she managed to pull it out successfully. The energy is now trapped in the doll, and Grandma is fervently fanning a maneki neko. The maneki neko fled into a small room, but was still sensed and captured by Momo. Upon checking, the maneki neko was indeed pinned to the ground. cursing in Speedy Grandma's voice. It turns out that during the moment of being burned by the barrier spell, Speedy Grandma turned into a spirit and swam through the flames, returning to Ken's body. She was barely alive, which perfectly concealed her presence. She had planned to recuperate inside Ken, but was discovered sooner than expected. Now, she is just a maneki neko, rolling and throwing tantrums on the ground. Ken also demands his balls back using a charm. Speedy Grandma, looking smug, isn't afraid of them taking action. If she dies, Ken's balls will never return. She even threatens Ken to kill Momo and her grandma with a kitchen knife, and then return his balls. But as soon as she finishes speaking, Ken suddenly transforms. Speedy Grandma is stunned. Only Grandma understands what happened. She had fanned Speedy Grandma out of Ken's body, but Speedy Grandma clung desperately to him, so only her consciousness left. Her spiritual power remained inside Ken. Only Grandma can put Speedy Grandma's consciousness back. Now, control is back with them. The maneki neko is sweating profusely, and then gets fanned vigorously by Grandma. Ken returns to normal. Eventually, Momo pleads for Speedy Grandma, not really hating her, as they all sympathize with the girl spirits bound to the earth. Momo states that as long as Speedy Grandma returns the balls, they will restore her powers. Finally, Speedy Grandma agrees, but now the problem is she accidentally lost Ken's balls. To find his lost ball, Ken, along with Momo and Granny Speed, rummaged through the bushes late at night, but couldn't find it anywhere. Granny Speed suggested it might have been taken by someone because the golden ball contained powerful life energy, attracting spirits or monsters who believed that collecting such life forces could revive them. Continuing the search seemed like finding a needle in a haystack. Granny Speed didn't mind much, but she ended up getting kicked around by the two. At this point, they could only go back and think of another plan. Granny only mentioned she would ask around among people she knew, advising Ken not to act recklessly as her power was still inside him. The next day, Ken went to school as usual and was stopped by some handsome classmates who insisted on meeting Momo. Despite having faced life and death situations together, it was only then that Ken realized how cute Momo was. Then he heard a boy claim that Momo was willing to date anyone, as that was the rumor. Outraged by the slander about his close friend, Ken grabbed the boy by the collar and even transformed on the spot, pinning the handsome student down and threatening them not to spread such rumors, which scared them into begging for mercy. Ken then returned to normal and was about to calm down when Granny Speed, hidden in his backpack, suddenly popped out. Ken quickly grabbed his backpack and ran out of the classroom. Granny Speed still coveted her power within him and tricked Ken into letting her enter his body again to retrieve her power, but Ken was no longer fooled and insisted on getting the ball back first. At that moment, Momo arrived, and facing her directly made Ken's face turn red instantly, thinking, "How can my good friend be so cute?" He felt a bit shy to face her, and the more Momo chased him, the more he ran, unaware that Granny Speed had sneakily left. Later, Momo heard from her best friend about Ken fighting for her, making her even more puzzled why Ken was avoiding her. Meanwhile, Super Beauty Aira was enjoying everyone's attention. Although she looked down on these people, she relished the attention they gave her. However, her cute and considerate nature had suffered a setback with Momo, so Aira purposely spread a rumor about Momo being promiscuous, but it surprisingly didn't spread. This confirmed to Aira that Momo, who had devil's wings, was truly a demon. Ever since picking up a golden ball, Aira believed she was a chosen warrior destined to save the world. It was after finding the golden ball that she began to see things others couldn't. It turned out that Ken's ball had ended up in Aira's hands. That night, during the battle between Momo, Ken, and Granny Speed, the golden ball accidentally fell near Aira's feet. As she picked it up, she happened to see the scene of a bound spirit dissipating. So Aira unhesitatingly pocketed the golden ball. Then she had her friends help her gather items like a book of curses and a crucifix that oddly smelled of oyster sauce. Her friends didn't really believe her claim of being chosen by the heavens. They just went along with Aira for the fun of it. Suddenly, Aira claimed to see a woman in a red dress below, though her two best friends saw nothing. Aira took this woman to be Momo's familiar, convinced that Momo was always watching them. While she was getting carried away with her act, some boys approached, and Aira quickly tossed the crucifix to her friends and pretended to be innocent in front of the boys. Unbeknownst to her, all of this was witnessed by Granny Speed. At lunchtime, Granny Speed, Momo, and a cat went to the rooftop to eat. Granny Speed and Momo almost came to blows. Granny Speed was worried that the golden ball might indeed be at the school, possibly picked up by someone there. She feared that if a human picked it up, their spiritual power might awaken, allowing them to see ghosts, who in turn could see and even attack them. By now, Granny Speed knew that Aira had the ball, but retrieving it would have to wait until after school. Aira, meanwhile, had her own plan. She spent the class fondly playing with Ken's golden ball, noticing the woman getting closer. She wondered if she could take her and Momo down at the same time. After school, however, she directly approached Momo and even lowered her stance just for a chance to talk to her alone. Ken and Momo didn't know the golden ball was with Aira. Momo told Ken to go look for it himself and then followed Aira away. Unexpectedly, Aira led her to an abandoned house, where Aira's two friends ambushed Momo. Once inside, the two girls pinned Momo down, and Aira, mounting her, pulled out the crucifix and the Book of Curses. Angered, Momo used her powers to throw the girls off. Aira, now more convinced of her suspicions, took out the golden ball and pressed it against Momo's face. Momo exclaimed, telling Aira it was Ken's ball, but Aira didn't believe her. Fortunately, Ken arrived, but his attention wasn't on his ball because something more terrifying was approaching. Before he could finish his sentence, a giant woman in a dress rushed up and grabbed Aira, saying she had been waiting for Aira to see her and calling herself Mom. Aira still didn't recognize her. Meanwhile, Ken had already transformed and charged at the woman. Aira, still clueless, continued shouting, unaware that Ken was also a demon. Despite his speed, the woman caught him and swallowed him whole. With her hands bound, Momo could only try to use her powers to pull him out, but without her hands, it was too awkward. She ended up being flung away, while Ken was completely swallowed by the woman. Aira was still baffled, the woman claiming to have waited for her for over 10 years, just hoping to hear Aira call her mom, something she had apparently done once as a child, though Aira had no memory of it. Momo got up again, determined to capture the evil spirit in the name of justice. Aira then realized something was wrong. The ghost wasn't Momo's familiar, and they seemed to be adversaries. At that moment, Granny Speed emerged, phone in hand, already aware of the woman's identity as a nimble, long-haired woman, considered a lower-class monster by her spectral standards. Aira still believed she was a divinely chosen magical girl meant to defeat the ghost. She directly exposed the ghost, who then swallowed Aira as well, blaming Momo for leading Aira astray and causing her not to recognize her own mother. The ghost's hair shot out, trapping Momo with no escape. Granny Speed, unwilling to help and somewhat amused, watched as Momo, bound by the ghost's hair, was dragged away. Despite being bound, Momo, tough to the bone, not only refused to apologize but also cursed at the ghost, who swung her around by the neck, nearly strangling her. Still defiant, Momo was then swallowed by the ghost, who frothed at the mouth, demanding to know where her child was. Now only Granny Speed was left. The ghost, not recognizing her as a senior figure, received a casual reminder from Granny Speed that she had swallowed her hair along with Momo. Suddenly, the ghost's hair caught fire. Unknown to her, she had also swallowed Aira and a crucifix, which was actually a lighter. Momo used the lighter to set the ghost's hair on fire, causing the ghost to burn from the inside out. She was forced to expel the three people and the lighter. Proudly posing, Granny Speed declared it was their turn to strike back. After being spit out by the female ghost, Aira fell into a coma. Hearing Momo and Ken still shouting about retaliation enraged the ghost. She could not forgive them for taking her daughter, Aira, away from her. Her body suddenly transformed. Her hair hooked onto a steel pipe and surged like a wave. Ken quickly transformed, grabbing Aira and Momo, and they fled the factory filled with obstacles. As they dodged around, Momo just finished saying he had a plan when the ghost attacked from above, kicking Momo away. Her hair turned into spider silk, weaving a trap in the air. Knowing Aira was the target, Ken continued running with her, dodging the hair attacks. The numerous obstacles hindered his speed, and during a leap, the ghost, graceful as a ballet dancer, kicked him over. Aira was thrown out as well. The ghost landed lightly on her toes. Unwilling to tolerate her rebellious daughter, she decided to consume her and turn her into her own flesh, so they could be together forever. However, as she was about to grab Aira, her hands could no longer move forward. Her hair had gotten tangled with the factory's pillars during the chase. Yet, this could not hold the ghost back. She kicked a pillar apart. Momo quickly used his powers to grab the ghost's leg, asking Ken to deliver a powerful blow, but Ken was unsure how to strike. While they argued, the ghost broke free. Momo kicked Ken away to dodge an attack. The frantic ghost launched a full-force strike, but before it could reach Momo, Ken rushed in faster and tackled the ghost out of the factory, smashing her against an external wall. Momo praised Ken, but the ghost lamented the limited power he possessed. Weakened by her own attack, the ghost could no longer use her spiritual power. Meanwhile, Momo found Ken's golden orb on Aira. Unfortunately, there was only one, and Aira appeared to be dead. Momo and Ken checked her and found no heartbeat or pulse. After all, ordinary humans eaten by monsters usually die. Momo and Ken were exceptional cases. But Momo refused to give up, using his powers to compress Aira's heart and instructing Ken to perform CPR while asking the ghost to call an ambulance. However, none of these efforts worked as the dead cannot be revived. The dying ghost also came over, unable to accept Aira's death, claimed she had a way to revive her by giving her own Ki to Aira, similar to how a battery works. Momo was skeptical, fearing the ghost might take the chance to consume Aira. The ghost then broke her own jaw to prove she would not eat humans again. If still in doubt, they could destroy her head with the steel rod. The neighboring grandmother confirmed the female ghost's claim. At this point, Momo had no choice but to take a gamble. After all, Ken still had the strength for one more full strike. The female ghost instructed Momo to use his powers to connect her energy with Aira's, like a communication cable. Momo reminded Ken to stay alert and then did as the ghost instructed. This connection awakened all the memories of the ghost's life. She was a single mother who saw a beautiful red dress on her way home that her daughter would look lovely in, but she couldn't afford it. Walking through the narrow corridor back home, her daughter ran into her arms as soon as she opened the door, bringing an instant smile to her face. She worked hard during the day and spent her rest time practicing ballet with her daughter. Despite their fatigue and poverty, they were happy. The mother also documented her daughter's growth through photos, and her daughter enjoyed ballet. Eventually, the mother saved enough money to buy the red dress for her daughter. But as these bright, happy memories flowed, darkness arrived. That night, while celebrating her daughter's birthday, after eating and drinking, her daughter fell asleep on her lap. Looking at the stars outside, she thought these happy days would continue. But that day, uninvited guests arrived at their home. During the altercation, the mother was thrown and shattered glass pierced her body. Unconcerned, she lunged at the intruders trying to take her daughter, but was knocked back, hitting a table and causing their joint photo to fall and become stained with blood. Eventually, drained of all strength, the mother could only watch helplessly as her daughter was taken away. The rain outside grew heavier. The mother suddenly awoke in panic, rushed out of her house to the streets but couldn't find her daughter anywhere. Running too hastily, she fell. In a daze, she relived the moment her daughter helped her up. Now, desperately stretching her arms to grasp something, she caught only emptiness. Finally, her hand fell limp, blood mingling with the rain. The mother felt her body become light and danced her daughter's ballet in the beautiful night sky on the dirty city streets. Her body spun rapidly, as if endlessly, tirelessly. The scene shifted, memories flashed, and finally froze at the moment her daughter embraced her. Then, with a thud, something heavy fell. The mother who jumped from the rooftop could not survive and became a memoryless, wandering ghost, unaware of why she lingered, only vaguely feeling she had lost something important. It was then that Aira, possessing weak spiritual powers, saw her and grabbed her skirt, calling, "Mommy." Only when the ghost turned did she realize the mistake. Just then, Aira's father arrived, narrowly missing the ghost's attempt to touch her. Aira's father, unable to see the ghost, heard his daughter call for her mother, and once again told her that her mother had gone to a faraway place. Aira's mother had also died. The female ghost remembered she had a daughter, but mistook Aira for her due to her disordered memories. Over the next decade, she stayed by Aira's side as a spirit. The energy transfer ended. Momo, acting as a conduit, received the ghost's memories and was moved to tears. She stopped Ken, who was about to act against the ghost unknowingly. Aira also revived. The ghost, now relieved, apologized to Aira. She had vowed to protect her but became a monster that couldn't even control its own emotions, hurting her. Thankfully, it was all ending now. The ghost's body began to disintegrate as her energy was depleted. With unfulfilled wishes, she couldn't achieve enlightenment and was destined to fade into nothingness, erased from existence. Everyone would forget her, including her daughter whose whereabouts were unknown. Aware of everything, Momo couldn't bear to just watch and asked the neighbor grandma if there was any way to help. The grandma coldly replied, "No, as attaining enlightenment is a personal spiritual journey that others can't assist with." The ghost's legs crumbled. Her red dress, once worn by her daughter, fluttered. She wished she could have bought her daughter prettier dresses, spent more time with her, and wished she wasn't her daughter. Perhaps then they could have had a happy life. As she faded, the ghost felt only guilt towards her daughter and regret for herself. However, a girl approached her against the light and hugged her tightly. It wasn't her daughter but Aira, whom she had protected as her own. Aira cried out, "Mom, I love you. I am the happiest child in the universe." The ghost hugged her back, just as she had once watched the stars with her daughter. Aira's only wish was for them to be in a world where no one could hurt them. A happy and gentle world. The ghost completely vanished, but it didn't matter. Aira would never forget her. After rescuing Aira, Momo simply took Ken and Aira back to her own home. She thought Aira was targeting her because she had accidentally dropped a basin on her head that day. However, Aira claimed she was acting out of love and justice, suspecting Momo to be a demon after her investigation. Momo was dumbfounded, having explained herself numerous times already. Yet Aira still did not believe her, and now even started suspecting Ken, especially since he had transformed during a fight with a ghost in red. How could he look any different from a demon? Most importantly, how could such a young and beautiful woman possibly be Momo's grandmother? The grandmother, amused by how articulate the child was, did not hesitate to betray her granddaughter. Aira now was convinced that both Ken and the grandmother were demons, with Momo as their leader. Momo was speechless over this delusional thinking. The two slurped noodles while hurling insults at each other. Aira's disbelief stemmed from her firm conviction that she was a chosen warrior by the heavens and labeled Momo and her group as villains. Yet, Ken continually rescued her from danger, prompting her to ask why. Ken's straightforward answer was that he helps others in trouble. This response immediately won Aira's heart, convincing her to rescue Ken from the clutches of Momo, the villain. On the way back, she even fantasized about a tragic love story between a human and a demon. Meanwhile, the grandmothers were trying to put Ken's golden ball back in place. They mistakenly used it as a baseball, but the grandmother missed her swing, and the ball flew directly toward Ken, striking him hard. It ended up back where it belonged, but the other one was still missing. However, Ken was now unrecognizable to them. At noon, Momo tried to invite him to lunch on the rooftop, but he refused, making up excuses to decline her after-school invitation as well. Momo sensed his reluctance and returned to her friends without asking why, telling them something was off with Ken, possibly hiding something, or involved with another girl. Distraught, Momo decided to buy a drink to calm her nerves. On her way back, she debated whether to check on Ken's class, but ran into him pinning Aira down behind the building, with Aira seemingly enjoying it with her eyes closed. This all started not long ago when Ken was secretly doing push-ups behind the school building to alleviate Momo's burden, knowing they still had to find another golden ball and would likely encounter more formidable monsters. He couldn't always rely on Momo's supernatural powers, so he followed his grandmother's advice to train daily. While training, Aira appeared, overwhelmed by her feelings, rushing to kiss Ken. Ken, realizing what was happening, pushed her away in shock and questioned her actions. Aira explained that a kiss was necessary during a confession, as stated in the book she read, which also mentioned that men are obliged to accept confessions. Ken was speechless, considering Aira was the school beauty, but seemed clueless about romance. There was no romantic ambiguity in their confession, just like two sumo wrestlers clashing. Ken couldn't understand Aira's thought process and bluntly told her that she hadn't done anything right so far. Although Aira was hurt by this, she still wanted her confession to succeed. Unexpectedly, during their argument, they both fell down, leading to the scene Momo had just witnessed. As they lay there, looking into each other's eyes, their hearts raced. Aira pursed her lips, waiting for Ken's kiss, but Ken noticed Momo and hurriedly started to explain. However, Momo had already stormed off in anger. She had said she needed to write a report and couldn't join him for lunch, yet here he was, involved with another girl, his jacket off and sweating. It was hard not to suspect what they were doing. Momo didn't want to hear Ken's explanation, and just watched him dumbfounded as she left. In today's biology class, the teacher discussed mantis shrimps, which can punch at speeds of 80 kilometers per hour with a force of 150 kilograms. If scaled up to human size, that would be 700 tons. Momo, however, was disinterested in the lesson, preoccupied with thoughts of Ken. Ken was also distracted, not paying attention to the class and instead doing arm exercises and reflecting on his actions. He realized that deceiving Momo was wrong and that he deserved the misunderstanding. If he truly cared for Momo, he shouldn't have made excuses. Suddenly he noticed he was alone in the classroom and the floor was wet. Then a scream from outside prompted him to rush out, finding Aira. It was already dark outside. Aira suspected Momo was behind this. Remembering the alien encounter at Momo's house, Ken hurried to Momo's classroom, but she wasn't there. She had noticed something was amiss and went to the corridor. The windows had been welded shut, and the water level was rising. Momo was worried about Ken as she heard faint sounds in the dark corridor. She held her breath and waited, only to be shocked by a giant dinosaur. Momo quickly hid behind the classroom door, but her movement stirred the water, alerting the dinosaur. Momo felt the beast approaching through the water vibrations and covered her mouth to stay silent. The dinosaur, however, lowered its head and sucked in the water like a storm, then shot out a beam of light along the corridor, piercing through walls and pillars. Momo narrowly escaped disaster by hiding behind the wall, but was still worried about Ken. Unaware Ken was arguing with another girl, Aira accused him of conspiring with Momo against her. Ken was speechless and shared their previous experience of being trapped in a similar barrier and defeating an alien to return to normal. Aira caught on to the key point. What? Are there really aliens in this world? Ken simply explained a few things, noting that those aliens seemed to be collecting human organs. Just after he spoke, a strange creature appeared in front of them. The monster charged and threw a punch at Ken. Ken quickly transformed and retreated while holding Aira. He then put her down and told her to move aside, calling her a nuisance. But Aira was focused on the fact that he had called her by name. They hadn't even kissed yet. How could he call her by name so casually? Ken ignored her complaints as the monster in front of them launched another attack. Suddenly, Ken reverted to his normal form, feeling as if 1,000 pounds weighed him down, pinning him to the ground. 3 aliens surrounded him. Seeing Ken in trouble, Aira quickly pulled out a cross. Ken urged her to run away, warning that these aliens were after female organs. Sure enough, an alien repelled Aira with a flick, but they seemed uninterested in her. Their target was Ken's reproductive organs. Ken was flabbergasted. Why did everyone want his reproductive organs? The aliens explained that it was because they were valuable and boasted that Ken possessed capabilities surpassing their technology. They believed transplanting his abilities to themselves would make them stronger. Ken told them it was due to a curse, but the aliens, not understanding what a curse was, hoisted him up as if on a pilgrimage, preparing for surgery. Suddenly, 3 aliens were entangled by red hair. Aira had transformed into a red-haired demoness. Aira, transformed into a red-haired demoness, repelled the enemy and rescued Ken, who was disheveled at the time, fully exposed to Aira. However, aliens and monsters were also present. Seeing Aira as a telekinetic, the aliens decided to harvest her reproductive organs as well. At their command, a boxer immediately charged at Aira and engaged in a fierce fight, with the aliens assisting from the sidelines, while Ken was busy looking for clothes. Suddenly, a rocket punch flew in, knocking both a person and a desk into the air. Aira had to fight the boxer while dodging alien rays, talking trash all the while. Nonetheless, she was skilled, kicking the boxer up to the ceiling. She then turned her attention to the aliens, but was surprised when, with a mere wave of their hands, they slammed her against a wall with an invisible force, ending her transformation. The aliens then focused on her skirt. Even then, Aira proclaimed herself chosen by the heavens. The next moment, the boxer punched her in the stomach, breaking the wall. At this critical moment, Ken stepped up, still undressed but unashamed, exposing himself to the enemy to save Aira. After speaking, Ken transformed again and moved next to Aira. However, the aliens replicated the gravity effect, rendering them helpless and ending their transformations instantly. This was a zone created by the combined telekinetic powers of 3 aliens, where they couldn't even stand. The aliens couldn't enter either, so they sent the boxer to brutally attack Ken. Unexpectedly, Ken managed to push the boxer out, breaking the barrier. As the aliens wondered, Momo arrived, using her psychic powers to repel their telekinesis. Now reunited, the 3 were fearless against the aliens. In the next moment, all 3 were knocked down. Momo had a moment of weakness, which the enemy exploited. One alien quickly woke the boxer, threatening wage deductions if he didn't work. Unable to move, the boxer was injected with an energy drink and transformed into a mantis shrimp form, still obliged to work despite being a monster and even facing wage deductions. The fully revived mantis shrimp savagely attacked Ken and Aira, but fortunately, Momo regained control and pushed back the aliens' telekinesis. The aliens directed the shrimp to strike Momo, but once free from gravity, Aira and Ken immediately attacked. However, upon touching the shrimp, Aira was instantly flung to the ceiling, stuck due to the creature's speed. Fortunately, Ken rescued her in time, clearly seeing the creature's punches. Ken and Aira then clung together, combining their strength and speed, finally managing to temporarily suppress the shrimp, while Momo could hardly bear to watch. Unaware, they were once again overpowered. The aliens deemed the mantis shrimp too weak and decided to cut its salary by 60%. Just then, the water on the ground flipped, sweeping them all into it. Subsequently, the walls and ceiling also turned into water. The dinosaur Momo had seen before arrived. Ken was thrilled to witness what he thought was the Loch Ness Monster. Aira, seeing this, joined Ken in excitement. Momo didn't want to bother with them. The aliens were still blaming the dinosaur for not restraining Momo and decided to cut its salary by 60% as well. Before they could finish their sentence, the dinosaur's ray split them in half. Ken and Aira then realized how dangerous the dinosaur was. Ken and Momo swam forward desperately, but Aira, lagging behind, was struck by the shrimp and thrown to the ceiling. Momo recalled from biology class that the mantis shrimp's punches are stronger in water. The shrimp itself said it could only show its real strength in water, but had to surface for air since it still breathed with lungs. Ken was also struggling as he could only swim in his original form. Aira was still floating in the sealing water, needing urgent rescue. Ken and Momo tried to devise a plan but ended up arguing. Momo blamed Ken for flirting with Aira, especially during their time in the atrium where Ken had pinned Aira down. Ken realized Momo cared a lot about this, but Momo wouldn't admit it. Suddenly, Ken took her hand, suggesting that if she cared, she should tell him so he could explain properly. Ken didn't mind others misunderstanding him, but he didn't want Momo to misunderstand and wanted her to know him better. As they shared their feelings, the dinosaur couldn't bear watching and shot a laser. The two quickly dodged into the water, coming close enough to almost kiss. Fortunately, Momo thought of a way to rescue Aira, using her psychic powers to hold on to Ken and propel forward, allowing them to fly in and above the water. They managed to retrieve Aira, who had passed out. Momo used her powers to make Aira spit out all the water and then reminded her to remove her clothes to reduce water resistance. Now all 3 were at the ceiling, with the shrimp and aliens below. The aliens felt the 2 temporary workers they hired were unreliable. Although the shrimp's attacks were strong in water, it needed to breathe frequently. The dinosaur, although powerful, attacked indiscriminately. It seemed necessary for a 3-way fusion. Below them, a monster fusion occurred. Aira was still embarrassed about Ken seeing her in her underwear. Momo and Aira both mounted Ken, and as they were about to fly out, they saw the monster below shooting at them. Fortunately, Ken's speed allowed them to escape, but the fused monster shot the water clean. However, it immediately swallowed water again, storing it in its neck. So if they could break its neck, the creature wouldn't be able to fire its laser cannon. Together, the 3 charged at the monster's neck. Aira tied her hair tightly around her neck and kicked forward. However, before she could land her kick, a punch threw her back. After all, this was a fused monster with not only a laser cannon but also the mantis shrimp's close combat ability. Aira was beaten and sent flying. The water in her neck filled up again, and a laser shot out directly. Momo used her psychic powers to speed up while simultaneously rescuing Aira. They now knew that the enemy had fused, making them virtually unbeatable in water. But then an idea struck Momo, and the next second all three were blown away. Momo faced the monster, with the aliens now in control, still interested in her body. Momo just waved her hand, but this time she manipulated the water flow, throwing all the surrounding water. The monster's body immediately showed abnormalities, as the mantis shrimp's punch is strongest in water and could cause its arms to burst if used on land. Despite this, the fused monster pushed Momo back into the water, where they could stay for hours, but they forgot Momo had two teammates. Aira again used her hair to tie up the monster, creating a fast track for Ken to charge at full speed and rescue Momo. The monster was shattered, and the barrier was lifted, restoring the classroom to normal. Ken and Momo lay on the ground, naked and embracing, panting and excited about their victory, laughing on the hallway floor. The surrounding students gathered around, shouting, "Why are these two embracing each other?" So having just escaped a life-threatening situation, the three had to run for their lives again. Ken, Momo, and Aira were taken directly to the school nurse's office after streaking in the corridor in front of everyone. However, the nurse was out, so they were left alone in the office. Now, Momo and Aira are both devastated, as their reputations among their classmates are completely ruined. They also worry about similar incidents happening in the future. It seems that the aliens targeted Ken specifically this time, because they want the power of the high-speed granny. This reminds Momo of Aira suddenly being able to use the power of the red dress ghost. Aira claims that she is a chosen magical girl, but this means she might also become a target for the aliens. If the aliens are so interested in the power of monsters, Ken wonders why they don't attack the monsters directly. He begins to explain to Momo and Aira that all over the world, there are folk tales of ghosts and demons that might be protecting the Earth from alien invasions. Aliens might not be able to defeat these monsters with their technology alone, and may attack special humans like them to develop technology that can surpass the monsters. Ken even suggests that the aliens may have taken one of his eggs. Momo and Aira are not interested in this topic. They are more concerned about how to face their classmates. Aira decides to blame Momo by saying she forced her into the situation. Just as she finishes speaking, Aira's two close friends come over and immediately suspect Momo. Momo doesn't explain, but asks Ken to clarify why he was hugging Aira. Ken quickly explains that everything was an accident. Relieved, Momo then asks Ken what he was doing there. Ken, slightly embarrassed, says he was working out because he wanted to secretly get stronger and impress Momo, making her think he is handsome. His ambiguous remark makes Momo very happy, even though she hasn't realized her own feelings yet. She looks at Ken, wanting to hear more such comments, which scares Ken into running away. However, Momo calls him back, and they both stand there, neither speaking nor daring to look at each other, creating a tense and awkward atmosphere. This moment is interrupted by Aira's two friends, who, eager for gossip, ask Momo what exactly is going on. Momo can't tell them the truth, so her friends are left to guess. They first bring up Aira and suggest that the three of them being naked together indicates a love triangle, possibly fighting over Ken, which led to a physical confrontation. They speculate this is why Momo was talking to a mantis shrimp, asking it how to throw a punch, and suggest Momo's dejection is due to jealousy of Aira. Although their entire process is wrong, their conclusion is surprisingly correct. On the other side, Aira was surrounded by her classmates. They were all kind to her and did not mock her for streaking in the hallway. They even unanimously believed that Aira was framed by Momo, thinking Momo targeted her out of jealousy for Aira's beauty. Some recalled a rumor that Momo was willing to date any man, a rumor started by Aira. As the classmates' comments grew harsher, Aira finally gathered the courage to admit that she had spread the false news and asked everyone to stop speaking ill of Momo. After confessing, she left the classroom, knowing her reputation had plummeted. Regretting and resenting what happened, Momo suddenly appeared. Surprisingly, the two developed an inexplicable camaraderie. Just then, the previously encountered mantis shrimp reappeared. Aira transformed and took a fighting stance, but Momo noticed the shrimp was covered in a white liquid and collapsed with just a touch. It turned out the shrimp was also a victim, dreaming of his son on another planet before passing out. When it woke up, it was in Momo's home, bandaged up. Momo pointed it out to her grandmother as an alien, but her grandmother didn't believe her, insisting it was a kappa, a former enemy. Despite their wariness, Momo still prepared curry rice for the shrimp, moving it to tears. It promised not to harm them again while eating. Later, Grandma ordered a deluxe sushi set, leading to a brawl over the sushi. After eating, the shrimp shared its story. Its son was ill, needing daily blood transfusions to survive, a condition that also killed its wife. To save his son, the shrimp needed a large sum of money but lived in a conflict zone with no jobs, forcing it to work abroad. Ken was moved by the story and even offered his own reproductive organ for the shrimp to sell, planning to retrieve it later. But Momo was more practical, noting that a lump sum wouldn't be enough for daily transfusions. The shrimp needed to earn money itself. Realizing Momo was right, the shrimp decided to leave, but was stopped by Grandma, who complained about the smell of its blood. After a sniff, she realized it smelled of something familiar and brought out a box of milk, which tasted just like their blood. It turned out Grandma had already noticed the smell of milk on the bandages, similar to wiping milk with a cloth. Surprisingly, kappa blood was also milk, solving the problem. Grandma said she would ask a farmer she knew to give a cow for his son to drink milk every day. The biggest problem was thus easily solved. The mantis shrimp was tearfully grateful. He bid everyone farewell and boarded the spaceship back home. He also said that if they ever faced any difficulties, he would definitely return to help them. After sending off the alien, Momo and the others immediately knelt down and begged Grandma to pay for new uniforms since they had no money. Using adults' financial resources seemed like the best approach at the time. Surprisingly, Grandma only agreed to buy for Aira and Ken, because she saw in Momo's eyes the intention to exploit her financially. If Momo wanted one too, she had to impersonate Hiroshi Abe to Grandma's satisfaction. With no choice, Momo complied. Just then, the doorbell rang, and it was Momo's childhood friend Jin, who was also her first love, causing Ken to suddenly feel threatened. Ken now feels a sense of crisis. The red-haired handsome man in front of him is Momo's childhood friend and first love, and he's going to live here, effectively moving in with Momo. Ken couldn't help but take a good look at him. The handsome man looked athletic just from his appearance, seeming like a genuinely decent guy. However, the next moment, Jin started acting crazy. It turned out he was a frivolous lunatic, and the more Momo scolded him, the more he enjoyed it. But the grandmother really liked this lunatic and told Momo matter-of-factly that they would be living together. Ken worried that Momo and Jin might rekindle their old flame. Aira, however, thought Momo was just gathering more demons for the upcoming final battle, Ragnarok. As a magical girl, she swore not to let Momo succeed. Previously, due to the common threat of aliens, Aira was willing to cooperate with her. Once the alien issue was resolved, Momo would be next. After saying this, Aira rushed off to gather her companions, leaving Momo on the verge of tears, wondering why all troubles seemed to converge at once. Seeing Momo like this, Ken could only take his leave, but was stopped by Momo, who desperately hinted that it was his turn to say, "See you tomorrow." Yet Ken hesitated even to say that, hardly a match for a rival in love. Jin, on the other hand, was not at all shy around Momo and the grandmother. While eating, he kept praising the grandmother's cooking, which delighted her. Jin sweet-talked her as if his lips were coated with honey, quickly winning her over. Now, Momo felt like an outsider. Although the grandmother and Jin said it was because Jin's parents were sick and hospitalized, forcing him to stay with them, Momo didn't believe a word. Unexpectedly, Jin then apologized for having mocked Momo in their childhood, revealing that he too could now see ghosts. Momo thought that Jin had stumbled upon another of Ken's balls, but Jin mistook her comment for a dirty joke. He then started talking about his family moving into the mountains during his middle school years. The environment was nice and the house was beautiful, but soon Jin felt something was off. His parents dismissed it, but Jin realized it when he clearly saw and felt that presence, which seemed to appear intentionally. Since then, Jin could see them, and his parents' health worsened. After consulting with famous mediums, 3 out of 5 committed suicide. They advised Jin to seek Momo's grandmother. Momo finally understood the situation and urged her grandmother to deal with the evil spirit. However, the grandmother refused, citing that her powers were limited to the city. Thus, Momo had to take on the task, especially since someone who couldn't previously see spirits now could, potentially linked to the incident with Aira and Ken's golden ball. Hearing this, how could Momo refuse? The next day, Jin arrived at Momo's class as a transfer student. He made a flashy entrance and charmed all the girls in the class. Before the teacher could finish speaking, Jin started flirting with a girl in the front row. Momo could hardly bear to watch. Jin openly acknowledged knowing Momo and even announced they were living together. He flirted with each of Momo's close friends, who didn't believe the handsome newcomer, knowing Momo was with Ken. Meanwhile, Ken was distracted, unable to focus on the teacher's words. He was preoccupied with thoughts of Momo and Jin living together, fearing their past as childhood friends and first loves might rekindle. Concerned that Momo might choose Jin, Ken feared losing their friendship and reverting to his old self. Overwhelmed, Ken decided to exercise behind the school building, only to be caught by Momo. She had come to eat lunch there to keep an eye on him. When Ken mentioned he hadn't eaten, Momo offered to feed him, but Jin suddenly appeared and disrupted the moment. Recognizing Ken from the previous day at Momo's house, Jin didn't care much and brought out Momo's favorite snacks, which delighted her. Watching them happily together, Ken felt too upset to stay and quietly left, only to encounter a naked man running towards him. Mistaking him for a cyborg, Ken shouted Momo's name and ran. The cyborg quickly overtook him. Momo, confused, knew she had to stop him first. As she prepared to use her powers, Jin grabbed her, dodging the cyborg as it jumped over them. During the chaos, Momo spotted something shiny, possibly another of Ken's golden balls. She tried to use her powers to catch the cyborg, but ended up being dragged along by Jin. The trio ran out of the school with Ken, transformed by his powers, quickly catching up due to his enhanced abilities. The cyborg, thinking Ken was trying to stop him, sped up. Momo grabbed Ken's hand, and after some tricky maneuvers, they avoided traffic and started parkour across rooftops. They finally caught up with the cyborg, but it clung to a telegraph pole until it broke. Stunned, Momo watched as the cyborg's parts reassembled on the ground, and it vanished swiftly. Momo and the others lost track of the cyborg. Ken was wondering what to do when Momo suddenly clenched her fist. Then, a painful scream came from the left. They chased in that direction, and after several turns, they arrived at a junkyard full of ruins. The cyborg was already lying there. It turned out that Momo had grabbed its heart when it tried to flee in pieces. She had been squeezing the heart to make the cyborg howl, using the sound to locate it. Momo and her friends didn't mean any harm to the cyborg. They just wanted to see its golden ball. Just then, a voice echoed from the ruins, calling the cyborg's name. The cyborg immediately rushed to find the source of the voice and dug out another female cyborg from the trash. The male cyborg began to profess his deep affection, each word striking Ken's heart. He said that his gray world had turned colorful since meeting her. However, the female cyborg said their manufacturing years were too different. They were from different worlds. Her mission was over, but the male cyborg needed to continue living. Otherwise, he would be treated as large-scale waste. Yet, the male cyborg didn't care. He didn't want to leave his loved one and had come here at all costs to escape with her. If he did nothing now, he would regret it for the rest of his life.